the Two Men and a Business Continuity Plan podcast. Navigating success through uncertainty.
Hello and welcome everybody to our podcast, beautifully named Two Men and a Business Continuity Plan with Charlie and James. For those of you who haven't watched the podcast, where have you been living on some planet which isn't Earth? Clearly, there are plenty of podcasts you can catch up on. This is the 11th. There are 10 previously, but you want to know who we are. So let's start with Charlie. Brief introduction, please.
Military emergency planning, business continuity, and for the last 17 years, business continuity consultant.
Fantastic. That was short and sweet. My background is 30 years in the COPS, where I did a lot of resiliency type things here, there, and everywhere. And then I've been in my own consultancy the last 11 years. And Charlie and I have known each other for as you know, for the last 20 years, probably. I think it's about 20 years almost.
And obviously, James started this when he was about 2. So
no, if they saw my face now and all my grey hair, they wouldn't think that. But we have a fantastic 30 minutes lined up for you today. And the topic is extremely current. And even if you watch this a little bit later on, the advice and this story is one that could happen to anyone. Because what we're going to look at today is what the UK's biggest retail cyber incident can teach every business about continuity, resilience, and recovery. So a little bit of background in case you haven't seen this. It's all to do with Marks and Spencer's. They suffered a massive ransomware attack in April 2025. And their online operations, would you believe, were affected and massively affected for 46 days. Customer data was breached, supply chain and in-store experience impacted, and it's still happening. I tried to order a jacket this week, couldn't order it in store, had to get it to my home address, then didn't want it, and you can't even take things back to the store. You have to send them in. They're not there yet, so they're still causing problems. How it happened then? M&S have confirmed that the breach was caused by human error at one of their suppliers, rumoured to be a help desk provider. Believe that the attackers were Scattered Spider. They use a ransomware under Malaysian hackers called Dragon Force, who impersonated IT staff to dupe ordinary staff into resetting passwords and then gaining access to the system that way. An interesting fact is M&S have declined to confirm whether or not they paid the ransomware, which would be interesting to know. But my first question for Charlie is all about what are the main lessons that business continuity professionals and the wider businesses can learn from this incident. So what do we think?
I think so. Always interesting is sort of Marks and Spencer's are a UK national institution. So it's one of those things, one of those sort of iconic household name treasures. Companies are affected, then you kind of everybody's interested and everyone's good opinion. There's been plenty of other cyber attacks before and plenty of other cyber attacks afterwards, but it just seems that this one has really caught the public imagination. And I think your story about trying to send back your jacket, I think is, it does affect a lot of people personally, that they can't do the online. And I think sometimes in Marks and Spencer's, it's a particular way of buying. People don't like going to the stores. They order 10 versions of different sizes so they can get the right size. So the kind of way you buy from Marks and Spencer's has been particularly impacted by this. So I think the first thing is you're going to be in trouble, or it's going to be difficult if you're a household name and you're in the spotlight. And I think it also says it can happen to anybody, just reinforcing that thing again. There have been retails hit before. I just remember a little while, the Co-op in Sweden had their payment systems. Again, with a third-party supplier, and I think we ought to come on to third-party suppliers. I'm sure you have some views on third-party suppliers there. So I think some of the key rules can happen to anybody here. it is difficult to manage well a long incident. I think at the beginning there was lots of praise for them to say they were very transparent, open. They say, they kind of stepped up, and then it goes on and on and on, and people get a little bit more annoyed, and you think, aren't we back up and going? And then there was an interesting article. I think we talked about some. They're always getting awards. Marks and Spencer's business continuity people have got more awards than I've had hot dinners. And then, you kind of think, well, shouldn't they done a bit better? And then I saw there was, I was just doing some reading beforehand, and there was on Sky to say, it was total chaos. They didn't have a plan. Had people working long hours, people asleep in the office. It was all chaos. That was sort of leaked person. So we don't know whether that's really true. It's whether just disgruntled person, or maybe that's what they saw, but they don't maybe have privacy to the plans there. So I think, there's lots of lessons to take away. That's a few. What sort of things are you thinking, James?
Well, I mean, I've got a few points. I mean, you are right. This is the problem of working in silos potentially. That, the IT team and the cyber team maybe didn't play nicely with the BC team and the risk team and everybody else. And it's all about, as we know, because of us working with lots of companies, is you've got to integrate. You've got to make sure that everybody's playing with everybody else, because especially for things like, it's not as though companies don't know this is going to happen. Yeah. So you've got to have played it beforehand, and you've got to thought, in the event of cyber don't fix the problem. Well, cyber fix the problem. The cyber people in IT get your systems back. But how do you then do your workarounds? I mean, if you know that you are not going to do online orders, if your website goes down and you're hacked, you're not doing online orders, well, you've got to think, well, how are we going to then keep business going? Because if you look at the losses were between 25 million and peaked at 40 million a week. Yeah. I mean, it's a 300 million plus, 400 million plus disaster. I know they're going to get some back through insurance. However, as you rightly identified, Mr. and Mrs. Jones sat at home who want to browse the stuff and then order it in, to come into store so they know what they're going to get, just couldn't do it. And Next and other retailers like that, H&M, Next, etc., have made massive gains in this area. So, I mean, cyber have got to play with everybody, and BC have got to play with everybody, and it doesn't look like they did. You're quite right about the supply chain issue. With regard to the suppliers, I mean, I'm working with a number of clients currently, and have been working, where IT suppliers have left open systems. One was a printer, and the attack came in through an open source printer. So they just got in because it was open. And this looks like, obviously, once again, a supplier has left the guard down and then made the company vulnerable. As we know, Marks and Spencers can't say it's all the supplier's fault, clearly, because they engaged with the supplier and brought them in. And it's not just about the supplier. It's so easily done without either preparing for the prevention or preparing for the inevitability of a ransomware attack that we all know is going to happen. What's your wider views?
I think, well, you teach supply chain, and we always say when we're teaching supply chain is, you outsource the activity, not the risk, and that's why you always come back on this thing of, you can't blame the supplier, because, well, who appointed the supplier, who checked the supplier? It does come back on you. So I think the supply chain issues is there. I think some of the money will be delayed income. If you didn't buy a jacket, you're still going to buy a jacket. So you might sort of say, well, I'll wait for a little bit. But you might want to be going to a wedding. I don't know where you're going to a wedding or not. We might be going to a wedding and actually you need the jacket. So I'm going to go to Next because I didn't do it. So there will be a bit of delayed income. I think there's an interesting bit about manual workarounds and how far that goes, because I did some work with a well-known fast food online fast food company. And if you think about Uber or bookings.com, there is no manual workaround for it. You couldn't have Uber
but
if they went.
Marx's have been going bloody hundreds of years, and they started in SOAR, and
Yeah.
it's as though they forgot that
But I
we
think that,
started in
there's
SOAR.
I think there's some things like, when I say Uber, to say you couldn't Uber, you couldn't go and say, well, look, we lost our platform, so it's all right. We'll give you a telephone number, and you can ring up, and we'll have a vast army of hundreds of thousands of people. So where are you going to? What are you going to? Old school taxiing. But it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work like that. So I think there is, and I think in business continuity, we have to admit sometimes there are certain activities we do which are binary. They're up or they're down, and you can't have manual work. I think you're absolutely right in terms of we should have manual workarounds for what there is manual work, but there's certain things you just can't.
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting there is because of this long delay, I suspect, and I don't know, they're rebuilding their systems from scratch. So they are basically
They've just said,
rebuilding.
I read a
Go on.
report saying that they had a 2-year plan and they've now drastically reduced their IT infrastructure upgrade based on the fact that probably the same old problem that we identify with our customers all the time. Legacy systems, newer
Yeah.
systems built on top, clunky, nasty old things working with more modern technology really doesn't work. And they've had a bit of a kick up the backside, and they're suddenly thinking, oh my God, we're going to have to spend something here, but also very quickly.
Yes, they might be saying, well, actually, I'm going to take an extra couple of months, but I'm going to rebuild the system we were going to build in the future. So we're going to rebuild that, and we're going to have to take the hit that in the meantime, but there's no building an old crap system that you do that. But it takes me wondering whether, so that may be the reason why they're taking so long. It also, I have the wonder of whether they actually didn't have proper backups, and the backups have got as well. Because if you look at the SEPA, I did some stuff with SEPA and Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, and they had to rebuild their finance systems from scratch because their backups were rubbish. And so they were basically getting the bank statement and getting people to rebuild it because that's and I just wonder whether Marks and Spencers are just having to go back to as if they were doing click and collect for the very first time, is building it again and doing that. But you see, IT systems take a long time. And one of their dangers is when they put the system back, it needs to work, because if your jacket doesn't go to the right place, or your jacket is blue when you wanted a black one, then that's another whole cycle of bad publicity. So you've got to make sure it's got right.
How do you think the comms have been? Because I mean, I don't think they've been out there shouting. It's not as though, do you remember, for example, sort of an equivalent but a different thing would be the horse meat scandal?
Yeah.
Where the affected suppliers were much more vocal in coming out and saying, we're really sorry.
Yeah.
We admit the fact that we don't quite know what we've done wrong, but we've definitely done wrong. And they threw themselves on the swords a bit. And I sort of haven't got M&S throwing themselves on any swords.
No, the comms. I've been reading quite a lot of it because it's kind of my thing, is doing comms after cyber incident, and all the commentators, having a look at that this afternoon, all the commentators seem to know at the beginning they did great comms. They got out there, they said, they did do this typical thing. I'm pretty sure said they weren't sure. They didn't say they hadn't lost data, but they didn't say they might have lost data. So they got caught up with that. But that's maybe okay. I just think it's almost like their comms have run out of steam. There's only so much you can say, and I think sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know. Who are Marks and Spencers? External PR company. They must be one of the big dogs, the global big dogs. And you must think, my God, come on, it's Marks and Spencers.
Unless you do it in,
if they haven't got holding statements and PR a go-go, then what? There's no hope for the rest of us.
But then they might do it in house. And the other thing is, what do you say? We're still not got anything going. And it's kind of.
But it never stops political parties spinning nothing to say, but in a way where it actually sounds like they're saying something.
Yeah. I think I think they've a bit ran out of steam, and I think I would just wonder if they're trying to play it low profile now. They're trying to they've come out and said things, and now they're trying to shut it down and try and say, let's get out the news, let's not putting anything, because as soon as you put something else out, it then gets the cycle again. They just announced, I think it was on the 10th of May, they were getting click and collect or one of those things back again. So that produces it, puts it up that you have to tell customers, not what point not telling them customers. So that produced the news cycle. So I just wondered if they're trying to say nothing and hope it goes away, or be not reminded of it anyway. I don't know
I
if
would suggest
you're
this
and
is
Marks
something
and
that's going
Spencer
to
on their
it's
email
going to
list.
bounce around a lot. This, I mean, it's
Yeah.
not as though it's never going to happen again, and everybody's going to bring this up forever. It's going to be,
Yeah.
you know, like we all mention like CrowdStrike constantly pops up, even though
Yeah.
it's gone away and they've tried to keep it very quiet. It's still one of those we're going to make reference to. Do you remember the Marks and Spencer's cyber attack?
Yeah.
It's going to be one of those ones that is never really going to go away. And if it happens again, you only have to look at Royal Bank of Scotland
Yeah.
and people like that. Where did they quite recover from these outages? Because it's an attack, which people do give them sympathy. I completely sympathise with them.
Yeah.
However, there's only so much that sympathy goes, really.
Yeah, and I think a little bit people are beginning to get grumpy about it. I think people are beginning to say, look, enough is enough, kind of, I've done my thing. I've not bought my new pair of pants because I'm waiting for them to be back in there. I read some stuff about people saying stuff was in stock and it wasn't in stock, going to the shop and not finding it. And, I think people do get grumpy. I think they get a bit fed up with it and say, enough is enough. So we're doing that. But it's interesting. I was reading something, I think it was from the grocer that was talking about the incident. And they said that during the
Oh my God, you have some fascinating reads. The grocer.
I was
Were you
actually
flicking through that at bedtime or on the train or something?
no, like unfortunately not, because it's probably. But I did pick up that they were at the height of their kind of when it first happened. They were getting 50 million impressions on social media on their attack.
Wow.
So this was a huge. It was a huge exposure for them. And if you think about in their sort of business cycle as well, they're just sort of coming back. They're resurrecting themselves, getting out a bit of the sort of slough of despond they were on. So they're kind of back on the front foot again. And it was talking about also about how in the back end do you PR out of it? Do you kind of go for individual, because basically what you have to do is replace your lost sales. So you have to kind of say, are we going to do discounting? Are we going to do, how do we get it back in the public? And he was talking about being kind of advertising is being sort of not too much product advertising, but being sort of quirky, being kind of interesting, just promoting the brand as opposed to, Mark Spencer pants are 50 quid off this week, or expensive pants, or rather lots of them. But, trying to do that, because sometimes if you can't buy something and they're still trying to sell, you get, well, why are you trying to sell me something? You can't even get that product to me. It's pretty
Compounding
crass.
the problem. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to move you on a little bit. I'm going to give you 5 things to think about. Okay.
Ooh, good.
So, what should businesses do right now to try and prevent this happening to them? I think they need to think about whether their business continuity plan is wide enough, holistic enough.
Yeah.
What do we think? To deal with things like cyber scenarios and the wider potential risks and threats. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that definitely. I think, you should use your business continuity, I think, for any incident. And, we say next incident is the one we're not thought of, so it needs to be prepared for that. But there are some specifics for cyber that organizations need to think through. And, that's a different scenario to product recall, to someone getting run over, broad, to health and safety incident. It's another incident, which I think everyone should have some sort of playbook plan, whatever you call it, contingency plan, which is specifically deals with the cyber incident, but it needs to be locked into your crisis management plan or incident management, whatever you call it, so that we use the usual way, we use the usual people, but it's a cyber incident. So I'm a great believer in having that plan.
Do you think the people at the top are trained well enough and savvy enough to do these across disciplines approach to a crisis?
I get really quite grumpy is the word of my day, or maybe it's your T-shirt there. But I just think, if your whole career could be failed on a cyber incident you manage badly, and then you give 3 hours of training a year, either you're pretty good or you're a bit crass and you think you're better than you are. But this requires cyber incidents, I think, are really difficult things to deal with. There's some
Yeah.
public sympathy because it's not your fault, but I think people believe it says, was your cybersecurity good enough? Do they really? And and we know there's a long tail on this. These go on for 2 or 3 years, so you have lots of opportunities to mess up, like Marks and Spencers. So I think, I don't think people. Some senior managers good at this, and they get it. But I think, well, you must train an awful lot of people. Do you not get frustrated by, the lack of training that senior managers will be prepared to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the fact that, I mean, I always say, I mean, you're brilliant at running the company, but how many crises have you actually run?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the bottom line. It isn't running your business. It's dealing with a crisis, which involves aspects of running your business, but it's the methodology and the nuances of dealing with a crisis first, and then everything else follows. And if you've never had any training in that, I mean, I talk to people and students all the time and say it's like you've got your driving test tomorrow, but all you've done is read it in a book or maybe look at it. You've never actually done it.
yeah,
And imagine your success of then passing your driving test if you'd never sat in a car and you'd never driven it. And you've got to get out there and do a bit, and you've got to practice. So you've got to train, you've got to exercise, because you never quite know when it's going to happen. But the inevitability is it is going to happen at some point in your organizational career. And do you want
yeah,
to be prepared? Or do you want to knee jerk it on the day?
yeah,
Chances of success? Pretty slim.
yeah. And
That's
it's
the major
down to
problem.
them. It's their career, that their bonuses, their career, their job. You've climbed up that greasy pole for 20, 30 years, and do you want your defining moment to be in the kind of Daily Mail sack for
Yeah.
crap crisis
Do
response?
you also think it's a little bit? Do you remember the story of the emperor's clothes? I
Yes.
always think it's a little bit emperor's clothes. For those of you who don't understand, it's basically it's a fable where the emperor kept being told they were perfect, they were brilliant, they could do anything. So the emperor was actually very savvy. So they decided to come in one day nude. So they were naked. And everyone was going, "Oh, how fine your clothes are, my liege, how beautiful you look," and this, that, and the other. And he eventually turned tails on him and said, "Just tell me the truth. I'm naked. You keep telling me I look great and my suit is this
Yeah.
and my suit's that, but I'm actually nude and I'm not stupid and I get it." The problem is, I don't think there's enough people at the top who realize they are naked. They are walking
Yeah.
around vulnerable, naked to these kind of risks and these kind of threats because everybody tells them, "Don't worry, it'll never happen. We're all prepared.
Yeah.
And if it does happen, you are so fabulous that you'll be great." And they won't because they
I
don't
think,
practice and they don't train.
I do think there is a lot more pressure on just the general. I always say when I started doing my cyber course, 2017, 2018. I'd put up a whole lot of acronyms, two-factor authentication, and most people just didn't have much of a clue at all. If you put out some of the acronyms, most of people getting. So I think the awareness, and I think boards and the NCSC and the government would be quite good at pushing down onto senior managers about you need to take it seriously. We do no end of cyber exercises, but I do think it is. I think there's a naivety about them thinking, well, I'll be fine on the night, I'll do a good job. I do a good job, Lee. No, I'll be fine, no problem. I've got, we've got lots of techies who do techie things, and
Yeah.
yeah, and
But
I
as we
think
know, it's
it's
not techie. So what about my second one? Because I'm
exactly,
conscious of time.
yeah,
Offline capability. I run a lot of scenario planning, and as we know, scenario planning is to develop plans. It's not an exercise. It's
yeah.
to develop the plans that then lead to an exercise. So do you think organizations are doing enough with in a cyber, if we couldn't do this, what would we actually do? Because
No, I don't think.
it doesn't look like M&S thought about that.
No, and I think I think there is some points that certain processes you'll be struggling to do offline, but I do think sometimes support services, finance, you can do it offline. You can do, you
But
could take a
do
lot
you
of
think
this.
it's even that? I think it's even more fundamental. Do you think these companies know that they could go offline?
I
Do you think
think
they've
they
even
do.
in the world thought, what would we do if we went offline?
Yeah, I think they do. I think they get that much because you can go. There's all sorts of reasons why, and I think they build a fair old amount of resilience into it. So, for the day-to-day kind of going offline, I think there's a fairly good amount of resilience, and people spend quite a lot of money on that. But I think, there is still bits that you just can't do it without, say, bookings.com. But I do think there is much more you could do cheaply without a lot of effort, is making sure finance can process finance without any computers. Payroll can do payroll. And some of those back office systems, which are, critical to the management, that you can do offline. I think if you can do offline or the manual workarounds, we need to document it. We need to practice it and not just say, "Oh, we got a manual workaround. That's all right." Well, what is it? Do it. Oh well, that's quite
Can
as
you
easy
actually do
as
it?
it
It's great
is.
saying you can do it, but can you actually do it? Walk
Yeah,
the walk, talk the talk. Final thing, I mentioned I had a customer who had a very significant ransomware attack a couple of years ago, and they completely and utterly, well, they relied on two things really. Firstly, 3 weeks before we'd run a ransomware attack exercise, and then it absolutely followed the course of that when they had it, which they said really helped. But what really, 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 really helped was great cyber insurance. And I know we don't sell it, and it's not
yeah,
part of what we do. But my God, I read cyber insurance policies all the time to check that the reality of what people are going to get is what they think they're going to get, that expectation. So, what do you think about cyber insurance? Because it gives you things like forensic analysis, advice on your
yeah,
ransomware, somebody to come and hold your hand, and loads of money to help you recover.
yeah.
As long as it's covered in your policy. I mean, I mean, I love it, but you've got to have the right policy. What do you
No,
think?
I think you're absolutely right. I always push people to get cyber insurance. Now, the market is sometimes easy to get it, sometimes really hard to get it. So the market goes in different places. But to me, the last thing you want to do is to be phoning up on a Friday evening through Google, say, "Can anyone help me? I need some response training here because I've just had a cyber attack." And you know, at least you get that sort of support. You can get PR support, legal support. The
Yeah.
bit umming and ahhing whether you can get your ransom paid sometimes, but I think that's sort of coming up. It used to be they would always. I think that's coming back, and they're not paying ransoms anymore.
The
But
UK government are currently contemplating banning ransomware payments across the board, not just related to terrorist organizations, but they're thinking, I read it the other day, they're thinking about stopping attacks because they're telling you you can't pay your
yeah,
ransom.
I
That's
think I
interesting.
think I think on that thing they're saying public sector by law cannot pay it.
Yeah.
I think they're saying that private organizations, it might be the only way you can survive, but private organizations must get permission to pay. And it's not so much about you can't pay it because you're X, Y, and Z. It's more about actually understanding what is being paid, how much is being paid,
Yeah.
and to whom. So they're more intelligent bit about, and then about sort of doing it. But you're absolutely right. If we banned it in the UK, I'm sure people can find ways of getting around it. But if you banned
Yeah.
it in the UK, then I think it'd be great if it would stop it. But people still attacking Glasgow City Council last week. And UK local authorities, unless I'm being very naive, will not pay. So why bother doing it?
They've got no money.
They're
They
not going to
can't pay. They're always in the red.
Yeah.
They just haven't got the money. I mean, it would be lovely if they had that option, but I'm sure they'd be spending it in a better place. So,
Yeah, exactly.
wrapping up, I reckon there's three things, and I'd like your observations
Yeah.
on these. Some wise words towards the end. Expect cyber attacks to be, certainly for the next few years, the leading threat vector in BC exercises. What do you think? Yes or no?
I don't. Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
Resilience must extend across digital, physical, and supplier boundaries. So we can't just think it's about us and we'll be okay because we do BC. What do you think?
No, it is our suppliers must come in there. And I think just one point, exercising with suppliers, we haven't talked about them.
Yeah. Tough to do, though. I mean, that could be a good
we
one
pay
for
them
the
lots of money, or they
time.
pay us lots of money, vice versa. Someone ought to have an incentive to do it. I think it's more on the too difficult pile or too complicated pile.
I think that's got legs for a podcast, mate.
Yeah.
I'll think about that for the next one. And the next one, prevention's great, but as we know, 0-day attacks and things like that, you can't prevent cyber. You can do everything you possibly can, but these, I was going to say, wonderfully creative hackers, because in a way, you have to admire their ingenuity. They are. I mean, having looked at ethical hackers and having been to a few conferences where ex-hackers come in and talk, the things that they do are pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But we can't rely on prevention. We've got to rely on preparation and response into recovery. What's your opinion on that one?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think we're in the risk business, and we have to go for what is the principal risk at the moment. And I don't think anyone would doubt about, there's climate change, there's terrorism, there's lots of stuff happening in the world, but cyber, to me, is the most likely thing for a major incident for most organizations. So it would be foolish not to make sure we've got plans, robust plans in place for it. Yeah.
And plug your cybersecurity course, clearly.
Because definitely. Today's cybersecurity incident management through BCT on the website. Beautiful tutor. Oh no, sorry, that's me.
Who is that? Who tutors on that course, by
the way? I think I'm over-egging it.
No, it's good. I mean, obviously the feedback is very good for that course and all the other courses related to cyber that business continuity training offer. That's it, I'm afraid. We've hit the time. So for those people who are new listeners, we are available on lots of different platforms: Apple, YouTube, Spotify, etc. Podcast 12 is in development based on some of the ideas that I've picked up during this podcast. Good. So, any final words, Charlie, before we close?
No, preparation. Train easy, fight hard. Train hard, fight easy, whatever it is. But practice,
I think you're right. In this case, it's train hard, and when you happen, it'll be even harder than the training was. But if you don't train, it'll be impossible, and therefore you will definitely fail.
Yeah.
Okay.
Words of wisdom.
See you next time.
Bye.